5 years. I watched the Chicago skyline from the 72nd floor, certain that diamond ring is coming tonight. Landon is late, his eyes distant when he finally arrives. No kiss, no hug, just a cold, practiced voice announcing our end. I need space. He takes a call and walks away, leaving me alone at a table for two. Then, a shadow falls. Landon's billionaire father, Richard, takes the empty seat, leaning in close. I am Chelsea Ball, and tonight was supposed to be the moment my life crystallized. I'm nearing 30, a financial data analyst, and the co-founder and algorithmic architect of a successful startup called Citrine Ridge Analytics. We were finally making serious waves in the Chicago finance scene, and I was about to solidify my partnership, both professionally and personally. I sat at a pristine table, suspended 72 floors above the city at the Heiress, a rooftop restaurant where the crystal glassware glittered like ice and the soft piano music promised happily ever afters. The sprawling mosaic of city lights below looked like a million tiny diamonds laid out just for me. It was our 5-year anniversary. This was it. The proposal was happening. I felt it in my bones, in the way the candlelight warmed my skin, in the sheer, undeniable luxury of the moment. What Landon didn't know was that I'd brought a proposal of my own. Tucked deep inside my small designer clutch was a slim, custom-made platinum ring. I was going to beat him to the punch, a little surprised to show him that I was all in, that I was as much a partner in our life as I was in my company. Everything was perfect. The setting, the anticipation, the almost unbearable weight of our shared history. He walked in 40 minutes late. Landon Hayes. He was, as always, impeccably dressed. A dark suit that cost more than my first car. Tailored to perfection. He was handsome in that cool, reserved way that suited a scion of the Hayes Meridian Group. But the moment he reached the table, the air changed from champagne bubbles to something flat and metallic. He didn't lean down to kiss me hello. He didn't even offer the usual peck on the cheek. He just stood there for a beat too long, then slid into his seat. His eyes, usually so sharp and engaging, avoided mine, darting instead to the dark pane of the window or the waiter discreetly pouring water. "Landon," I started, my voice bright, trying to override the creeping sense of dread. "The view is incredible tonight, isn't it?" "Yeah, great," he murmured, picking up his napkin. His movements were too precise, too controlled. He looked like he was prepping for a board meeting, not an anniversary dinner. I pushed my ring surprise deeper into my purse. The moment was gone. I tried to bring it back. I mentioned our big fundraising push, Citrine Ridge's massive growth this quarter, and the future, the 30% growth forecast I'd just finalized. That was when he cut me off. He didn't raise his voice. He just spoke with the calm, devastating finality of a judge delivering a sentence. "Chelsea, I actually need to talk to you about us." The blood drained from my face, making the restaurant lights seem too bright, too harsh. I managed to say, "Okay, I think we need to put a pin in this," he said, using the casual, brutal jargon of the corporate world. "I need space. I haven't been happy, and I don't see our futures aligning anymore." Not aligning? Our futures were a perfectly synced, custom-built algorithm. I felt like a tidal wave was hitting me in slow motion. 5 years, all the promises, the shared dreams of building an empire together, were collapsing under the weight of his empty corporate speak. "Landon, what are you talking about? Just last week, you were talking about that condo in the Gold Coast," I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. He had the decency to wince, but it was a fleeting expression, quickly replaced by that neutral, unreadable mask. "Things change. We're moving in different directions now." I started to formulate a response, a plea, a demand for a real explanation, something that honored our 5 years together. I wanted to tell him about the ring in my bag, about the future I thought we were walking toward, but he didn't give me the chance. His phone buzzed, not a discreet vibration, but a loud, urgent tone that cut through the piano music. He glanced at the screen, and for the first time since he sat down, His face showed genuine emotion, annoyance mixed with a flicker of calculation. "I have to take this. It's urgent. Work," he stated, standing up quickly. He didn't offer a half apology or a promise to return. He just stood, pushed his chair back into place with a neat click, and walked away from the table, leaving me alone with our half-full glasses and the sudden, suffocating attention of the entire dining room. The shame was a physical heat rising up my neck. I was the woman who had just been dumped mid-sentence on her anniversary by the son of a billionaire, and now everyone knew it. Should I grab my purse and run? Should I stay and pretend I was waiting for dessert? My vision was blurring with unshed tears, and I tried to focus on the distant traffic below, trying to reassemble the shattered pieces of my pride. It was in that awful, agonizing silence that the shadow returned. I looked up, expecting the maitre d' to politely ask me to vacate the high-demand table. Instead, Richard Hayes, Landon's father, the man who controlled the fortunes of the Hayes Meridian Group, a man rarely seen in public and even more rarely seen up 72 floors in a trendy restaurant, was standing right there. He was in his late 60s, radiating an almost physical intensity. He didn't look angry or even surprised. He just looked knowing. He walked straight toward my table and, with an unnerving calm, pulled out the chair Landon had just vacated and sat down. The sheer audacity of the gesture silenced the last of the dining room chatter. A billionaire had just inserted himself into my public humiliation. Richard Hayes reached for the bottle of vintage Bordeaux Landon had ordered, poured himself a small measure, and then, without asking, poured a fresh one for me. He pushed the full glass toward my trembling hand. "Drink this, Chelsea. You look like you need it." His voice was low, gravelly, and commanded immediate attention. I stared at him, unable to speak. "Mr. Hayes, He waved a dismissive hand. "Landon is an idiot. We all know that. But that's not why I'm here." He leaned forward, his elbows on the linen, his eyes, dark, intelligent, and piercing, holding mine hostage. He spoke barely above a whisper, making sure no one at the next table could hear. "He's hiding something from you, Chelsea, something big." The shock of the breakup was instantly replaced by a sharp, cold jolt of suspicion. I knew Landon had been distant, but hiding something? My analyst brain instantly cataloged the red flags I'd been ignoring. Richard Hayes reached into the inner pocket of his coat and smoothly placed a thin manila envelope directly in front of me. It was unsealed and unremarkable, but it felt like it weighed a ton. "If you don't know what he's hiding, you will be the one most harmed in this room, Chelsea," he continued, his tone devoid of threat, only fact. "The stakes are higher than a broken engagement." He pushed the envelope closer. "If tonight you find the courage to open this, your life will never go back to what it was 1 hour ago." I was trapped between two instincts: running out of the restaurant to escape the scorching humiliation, or staying to confront the truth hidden in that flimsy paper envelope. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Landon had broken my heart, but Richard Hayes was suggesting he'd stolen my future. I reached out, my fingers brushing the thick paper, the expensive paper, the luxurious restaurant, the breathtaking view. All of it suddenly felt like a stage set for a betrayal of monumental scale. The personal drama of a broken relationship instantly morphed into a ruthless financial thriller. I looked at the envelope. I looked at the cold, calculating eyes of the billionaire across from me. Running away meant accepting the role of the quiet, discarded fiancé. Opening it meant accepting war. My hand closed around the envelope. The paper crinkled under my grip. I chose war. I tore the flap open. The manila envelope felt like ice against my fingertips. But the heat in my chest was the sudden, sharp memory of 5 years ago, the real beginning of everything. I was fresh out of my data science program, the top of my class, working 20 hours a week at a boutique hedge fund, trying to learn the mechanics of the market from the inside. The world was still metric-driven and beautifully predictable. That's where I met Landon. It was at a dull industry dinner, the air thick with stale confidence and old money. He introduced himself simply as Landon. Working in finance, he didn't drop the Hayes name, didn't mention the family empire. He was quiet, listening more than talking, and he asked me about my master's thesis, a dense statistical model for risk prediction. With genuine, focused curiosity, he saw the fire in my mind, not the tag on my suit. That was the most seductive thing about him, the belief that he wanted me, the algorithm architect, not the potential accessory to the Hayes dynasty. It was 3 months into dating when the truth slipped out. A casual mention of a meeting with his father, the famous, infamous, formidable Richard Hayes. My gut clenched instantly. The chasm between us wasn't just money, it was entire worlds. I was raised by a single mother who worked 2 jobs to put me through school. He vacationed in private European islands. I told him we couldn't do it. Landon countered every objection with what I now recognize as calculated charm. I don't want to be the trust fund kid. Chelsea, I'm building my own path. I'm not relying on the family's money, he insisted, his voice earnest. I want to prove myself. Just like you. My name is just a name. It's us that matters. I didn't just believe him. I desperately needed to believe him. It allowed me to reconcile the class difference, to see our relationship as a partnership of intellect, not one of convenience. And so, I shared everything. Every spark of genius, every late-night running backtests, every line of code that became the skeleton for Citrine Ridge Analytics. I showed him the complex, beautiful architecture of the proprietary algorithm we were developing, the one designed to predict market volatility with an accuracy of over 85%. I didn't just share the what, I shared the how. I explained our strategy for scaling, the fundraising blueprint, the exact pitch deck for attracting venture capital. Landon, always the supportive partner, would nod seriously. That's brilliant. Honey, can I borrow that slide? I need to present a similar concept to my boss. He was always taking things, slides, proposals, entire risk matrix documents. He'd return a week later with vague pronouncements. My boss was incredibly impressed. Seriously, the most innovative thing he's seen. But the feedback was never actionable, never critical. Just this generalized praise that fueled my ego and solidified the lie that he was sharing my work with genuine professional admiration. The subtle red flags were always there, waving gently in the background, which I systematically folded away and ignored. Why did his boss never agree to meet me? The co-founder of the technology? Landon always had a ready excuse. Oh, you know Richard, he's incredibly private. He doesn't do small meetings. There was the time, maybe 2 years into our relationship, when I walked past Landon's open laptop. His inbox was up, and I saw a subject line flash for a fraction of a second. Proposal. Integrating Chelsea's engine into trial fund. I paused. What trial fund? Landon slammed the laptop shut with a speed that made me jump. Nothing, babe. Just some personal notes, internal strategy stuff. Don't worry about it. He smiled a little too wide. Changed the subject to a movie. And I let the anxiety fade, rationalizing it away as paranoia. He's just protecting his firm's secrets. It's business. Then there was the Hayes family itself. I was often invited to their colossal estate, a place that felt more like a museum than a home. The Hayes aunts and uncles would corner me, offering backhanded compliments with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. You're such a bright girl, Chelsea, so clever, despite your background. Despite your background, that phrase hung in the air, a constant reminder that I was an anomaly, an interesting, intellectual pet from the lower socioeconomic strata who had somehow managed to catch the eye of their precious Landon. They admired my brain, but they clearly saw my entire existence as an exception, not an equal. Richard Hayes, though distant, was perhaps the most unsettling. Every time we spoke, he'd bypass the small talk and drill straight into my work. He would ask highly specific questions about my coding methodology, my data training sets, and my risk control measures, questions only a true industry veteran or a serious analyst would ask. He probed my thinking deeply, yet always maintained a cold, impenetrable professional distance. I convinced myself this was simply the due diligence of a high-net-worth investor, curious about a bright young founder. The final, fatal step was just 1 week before tonight. Landon came to Citrine Ridge's modest office with a sheaf of papers. "Big news. This is it, honey. Just a small confidentiality agreement for the new round of funding. Legal stuff. You know, standard procedure to protect your incredible ideas as we get serious." He smiled the familiar, encouraging smile I thought I knew. I was so overwhelmed with excitement about the potential capital, so trusting of him, that I only skimmed the dense legalese. It mentioned IP protection and assignment of rights for due diligence. It felt heavy, official, and professional. Exactly what I thought we needed to be taken seriously. I signed it without reading the fine print, my signature a monument to my misplaced love and blind trust. I trusted him with my work. I trusted him with my life. And tonight, here I sit, staring at this thin, anonymous envelope. All those ignored red flags, the vague answers, the closed laptop, the patronizing compliments, the conveniently timed contract, they all coalesced into a single, terrifying truth in my mind. My hand started shaking violently. The paper was too thin, too quiet for the kind of destruction it promised. The fear was no longer about the breakup. The fear was that the man I loved for 5 years had been running a sophisticated, long-con heist, and I, the celebrated architect of complex algorithms, had been the easiest mark in the room. I have to know. I rip the remaining bit of the seal and pull out the papers inside. I pulled out the documents. They were crisp, official-looking, and printed on Hayes Meridian letterhead, the kind of paper that screamed millions of dollars and irrefutable legal authority. The main document was a massive investment contract. It outlined a proprietary technology acquisition deal. The provider? Citrine Ridge Analytics. The recipient? A specialized, high-leverage subsidiary fund of Hayes Meridian Group, managed by Landon's division. The first punch landed hard in my stomach. The signature block for Citrine Ridge wasn't mine. It wasn't Maya's, my co-founder. It was Landon Hayes. Beneath his name, the title read, Chief Technology Architect. Chief Technology Architect. That was my job. The role was defined in the contract with meticulous detail, responsible for the development, training, and maintenance of the proprietary risk prediction algorithm. Every function listed was a direct mirror of the work I had been pouring my life into for 5 years. Landon had not only signed away my company's technology, but he had legally claimed my title and my entire professional identity. I scanned the contract frantically, searching for the monetary terms, the large acquisition fee that would explain why Landon felt he could sign on behalf of Citrine Ridge. I found the section, Article 6, Intellectual Property Transfer. This was the second, more devastating blow. The clause stated that the intellectual property rights to the algorithm, the engine, were to be fully and irrevocably assigned from the initial, unnamed developer to the Hayes Meridian subsidiary. In exchange, a payout was detailed. A hefty 7-figure sum, the kind of money Citrine Ridge desperately needed, but a sum I had never, ever seen credited to our accounts. Landon had taken the company's biggest asset, given himself the credit, and presumably pocketed the massive transfer fee without my knowledge. I looked up at Richard Hayes, my face hot, my voice a shaky breath. This must be a mistake, a clerical error. Landon might have used the wrong title by accident. Richard's expression was immutable, like carved stone. He reached into his coat again, pulling out a second, smaller stack of papers, emails, printed with timestamps and metadata. Chelsea, I asked my internal counsel to perform a quick audit of my son's recent correspondence when he mentioned the engine acquisition. We noticed anomalies. Specifically, your name was systematically scrubbed from all drafts related to the core technology. He slid the stack across. The top email was from Landon to the Hayes Meridian Legal Department. The subject line was IP finalization. I read the sentence that cracked my world in two. My girlfriend developed the engine, on paper. It is now entirely under my control and signature authority. The phrasing hit me like a physical slap. Under my control, that was how he saw me. Not as a partner, but as an asset to be managed. The next email was a horror show of cynicism. It was dated 3 days ago, addressed to a senior board member. I recommend we postpone the announcement of the engagement until the full IP transfer is complete. It avoids asset sharing risk down the road. Should she and I ever part ways? The engagement, the ring in my purse, the beautiful, terrible dream I thought I was living. It wasn't just a breakup. It was the preemptive strike of a corporate predator. He hadn't broken up with me because he needed space. He had broken up with me because his legal work was done, and I was now surplus to requirements, a risk to his future inheritance. Then, I understood the confidentiality agreement he'd rushed me to sign last week. It wasn't to protect Citrine Ridge. It was the final, elegant addendum to legitimize the theft. My signature on that small document was the official legal hook that turned me from the co-founder and true architect into a mere, unnamed initial developer who had signed away all intellectual property rights. It was a perfectly executed maneuver, designed by a mind far more calculated than I had given Landon credit for. I felt dizzy, the lights of Chicago spinning. 5 years of trust, intimacy, shared vulnerability, all reduced to a meticulously planned project of appropriation. The personal betrayal and the professional fraud were braided together so tightly, they were indistinguishable. Richard watched me absorb the blow, his composure absolute. We don't permit anyone to use another's talent to climb the ladder in this family, especially not my son, he said, his voice dropping to that cold, authoritative whisper. I needed you to see this, Chelsea, before he went too far, before he destroyed your reputation alongside your business. My whole body was shaking, but the tears were gone, replaced by a crystalline clarity. The rage was clean and cold. Landon didn't just steal my algorithm. He systematically planned his entire relationship around the eventual theft, leveraging my affection and trust as his easiest entry point. Richard Hayes stood up, adjusting his coat. He didn't offer comfort, only direction. He reached into his pocket and placed 2 items on the table, a sleek black electronic keycard and a small silver key. The keycard grants access to the annex building, 24/7. The key is for a specific room on the 3rd floor. He paused, his sharp eyes meeting mine. If, tomorrow, you want to go to the very bottom of this rabbit hole, use them. There are things concerning your own life that even you don't know yet. Chelsea, things that Landon certainly hasn't found. He turned and walked away, leaving me alone once more, surrounded by the remnants of a luxurious anniversary dinner, clutching proof of my utter, catastrophic betrayal, and holding the keys to what felt like a secret financial vault. The choice was no longer about love or loss. It was about retaliation, power, and the full scope of the truth. The black keycard felt heavy, a small, cold assurance against the blinding chaos of the previous night. I found the Hayes Meridian Group Annex building downtown, a discreet skyscraper near the river that housed their most sensitive operations. The security guard, anticipating my arrival, waved me past the turnstile as if I were a frequent visitor, his easy compliance unsettling. It felt both secure and deeply suspicious. I used the keycard on the executive elevator, which whisked me past the sleek, minimalist offices up to the restricted 3rd floor. I located the unmarked door corresponding to the silver key and stepped inside. Richard Hayes was waiting. He wore a simple, dark sweater over a collared shirt, looking less like a titan of finance and more like a professor ready to deliver a complex, private lecture. The room was Spartan, just a heavy mahogany desk and 2 chairs. "Welcome, Chelsea," he said, gesturing toward a door at the back of the room. "This is where the real truth is kept." He led me through that door and into a space that took my breath away, the core physical archive of the Hayes Meridian Group. It was a cavernous, climate-controlled vault, filled with rows and rows of metal shelving stretching into the dim distance. Each shelf held bankers' boxes containing decades of contracts, proprietary fund reports, and highly protected internal memos. This wasn't just a business. It was an empire, preserved in paper and steel. Richard pulled out a thick binder labeled Project Sentinel, Phase 3. This, Chelsea, is the file for the trial fund Landon set up 3 years ago. The one you saw on his laptop. It was designed to run a deeply sophisticated, anonymous risk prediction model. He spread out a series of charts. On one side, a vibrant blue line showed the staggering year-over-year profit gains of the Sentinel Fund. On the other, a data printout detailed the exact metrics and parameters of the underlying algorithm. My stomach dropped. I knew those numbers, the performance metrics, the control variables, the high volatility prediction rates, even the signature dip in Cute Woo of 2 years ago. They were an almost perfect match to the backtest results I had run for Citrine Ridge's core engine. Richard confirmed my silent realization. We've been monitoring Citrine Ridge's public performance for years. The algorithmic style, the way it prioritized counterintuitive market signals, was extraordinary. I had an independent team of analysts cross-reference our internal data with your company's public-facing results. He pointed to a specific sequence in the code metrics, the technical fingerprint, the handshake of the data architecture. It all belonged to you, Chelsea, unmistakably. He admitted that initially, he had dismissed it as Landon borrowing a few insights from his bright girlfriend to impress the board, but that changed when Landon tried to legally acquire the IP outright. When he attempted to legally assign your ownership to himself, I realized this wasn't about showing off. This was a systematic, planned hostile takeover of intellectual property, and I won't stand for that kind of predatory behavior in my organization. Richard then opened a thin internal memo detailing the Sentinel Fund's progress. I scanned the credits section. My name was absent. Landon's notes about me were devastatingly casual. Girlfriend suggested approach X, or friend provided useful data set. He had reduced my role to that of a peripheral suggestion box, never the primary author. Then came the grand reveal, the actual reason Richard Hayes had stepped into the middle of my broken engagement. Landon was working for the wrong outcome. I decided to work for the right one, Richard stated, his eyes fixed on mine. 3 months ago, when I realized how far he was willing to go, I made a move. I established a new legal entity, Ball Insight Holdings. He presented the incorporation papers. There was my name, Chelsea Ball, listed as the sole legal owner, secured through a trust structure. This entity, he continued, placing a hand on the documents, now holds a protected golden share usage license for your technology across 2 of the largest Hayes Meridian subsidiary funds, including Sentinel. I've been gradually diverting a portion of the long-term royalty rights, not the initial acquisition fee, but the stream of revenue from the technology's application, into Ball Insight Holdings. Landon hasn't detected it. He thought he was consolidating power. In reality, I was building an escape hatch for you. The scale of this maneuver was staggering. I wasn't just a heartbroken analyst who had been defrauded. On paper, I was already the legal principal of a shadow holding company with vested, protected interests in 2 multi-billion-dollar funds. I had unknowingly gained a position of immense leverage, a power base built in the exact same boardroom that Landon had sought to control. You've been the true owner of a significant revenue stream for months, Chelsea, without knowing it, Richard said, the words echoing the depth of my shock. My mind struggled to reconcile my identity as the betrayed woman crying in a restaurant with the person who was secretly a major, protected stakeholder in the Hayes empire. Richard leaned back, the decision now completely out of his hands. I want you to join me in exposing the full extent of Landon's actions, before the board, before the family. It is a necessary cleansing of this organization. But this is not my revenge. It is yours. The choice of whether or not to use this leverage to bring him down is entirely up to you. Chelsea, not me. I returned to my apartment. The Hayes Meridian keycard and documents scattered across my living room table, polluting the space. I spent the next 4 hours rereading the cold, calculated legal language. Each phrase I deciphered: irrevocable assignment, unnamed developer, under my control. triggered a painful, specific memory. That time, Landon insisted on seeing the code for the 85% volatility predictor. Evidence: the late-night calls where he'd probe me about our fundraising strategy. Research: every intimate confession, every moment of shared professional pride, was now twisted into a data point in his scheme of appropriation. Our 5 years together were not a love story. They were his meticulously designed opportunity. The first person I called was Maya, my best friend and co-founder. I gave her the bare, brutal facts: Landon's staged breakup, Richard's intervention, the fraudulent contract naming Landon as the chief technology architect. The silence on the other end stretched, thick with dread. "I'm going to kill him. Chelsea, I knew he was an entitled jerk. But this?" Maya's voice was shaking with a righteous fury that mirrored the shaking deep inside my own bones. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, the question heavy with both accusation and self-pity. "I had suspicions about his professional interest, but you loved him. I thought I was just seeing red flags because I was protective. I respected your choice," she confessed. "But this changes everything. This is grand larceny." Maya, who was also trained in legal data analysis, immediately went into tactical mode. "Legally, Chelsea, you aren't just a victim. You're the provable owner. Our logs, the daily commit history of the code, the original email threads where we birthed the concepts, that's the real legal documentation. Landon's papers are full of holes. He lacked the authority, especially mine, to sign away the IP. We quickly devised a 2-layered strategy. Layer 1 was the quiet, technical verification. Gather every piece of forensic evidence to ensure that when we struck, the legal case was ironclad. Layer 2 was the strategy of presentation. Stage the revelation in a way that didn't just win a lawsuit, but systematically dismantled the false public image Landon had so carefully constructed. He had used his family name to climb. We would use that same platform to make him fall. Richard Hayes was already a step ahead. He quickly connected me with Eleanor Vance, a formidable internal counsel at Hayes Meridian. Eleanor was sharp, weary of the predatory finance world, and clearly relished the idea of taking down a powerful heir who stole credit. She guided me through the complex agreements Richard had established, specifically detailing the protective firewalls built into Ball Insight Holdings, ensuring that no matter the outcome of the ensuing legal battle, my rights and reputation were insulated from the fallout. "You're safe, Chelsea," Eleanor assured me during our first consultation, which lasted almost 3 hours. "Mr. Hayes has created a structure that prevents Landon from trying any legal recourse that would damage you further. Your main goal now is to choose your version of justice." This was the pivotal moment of my strategy. When I next met with Richard, I laid down my own terms. "I will work with you, Mr. Hayes, but I have a condition. I don't want this to be a public execution that destroys everything. If there is a way to hold Landon fully responsible, to strip him of his ill-gotten gains and position, while sparing the hundreds of innocent employees in those funds, I will choose that path. My goal is not total annihilation, it's accountability and integrity." Richard looked at me, not with the cold calculation I expected, but with a surprising shade of vulnerability. "That's a maturity my son doesn't possess," he admitted, his voice rough. He then shared something unexpected, a secret from his own past. "When I was a young man, starting out, I took an idea, a key technical concept, from a female associate. It boosted my career tenfold. I built this empire, but I've carried that debt, that guilt, my entire life. I never corrected it." He locked eyes with me. "I see this, Chelsea, as my chance to correct that mistake, at least in part. You choosing accountability over destruction is the right path. I will follow your lead." We decided on the battlefield, the grand 40th anniversary gala of Hayes Meridian Group. Landon was convinced this event would be his coronation, the public announcement of his leadership over the new technology fund he had, on paper, built. It would be the perfect gilded stage for the organized reveal. Working in secret with Maya, I diligently downloaded all the necessary irrefutable evidence from citrine ridges systems, chronological timestamps, the earliest algorithm drafts, internal emails that track the concept's evolution. This was my digital shield, prepared for any counterattack Landon might attempt. Later that evening, standing in my bedroom, I stared into the mirror. I took off the dress I'd planned to wear to our anniversary dinner and tried on a sharp charcoal suit, a garment of power, not romance. I looked at my reflection, not the tear-stained fiancé, but the determined architect. I didn't recognize the woman entirely, but I liked her resolve. "I am walking into that room not to save a relationship," I whispered to the stranger in the glass, "but to protect my value." The grand ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel felt electric, heavy with the scent of money, ambition, and imported lilies. Tonight was the 40th anniversary celebration of Hayes Meridian Group. The riverfront venue was a landscape of flashing cameras and black-tie brilliance. Every major player in Chicago finance, every business journalist, and every relative of the Hayes dynasty was present, their whispers amplified by the high ceilings. Landon Hayes was exactly where he expected to be, center stage, orbiting the board members, radiating the kind of confident entitlement reserved for future CEOs. He looked like the star of the evening, ready for his coronation. I arrived precisely 15 minutes after the cocktail hour began, escorted by Richard Hayes. Walking through the doors with Richard was like stepping onto a spotlight. The buzz in the room died down instantly, replaced by 100 sharp, curious gazes. The recent rumors of our broken engagement, combined with Richard's unusual public appearance with me, fueled a dozen new theories instantly. I could feel the judgmental stares of the Hayes aunts and uncles, the same ones who had offered the patronizing, clever despite your background compliments. They exchanged knowing glances, clearly concluding I was here for a desperate final plea. Trying to win back my place by clinging to the patriarch, I offered them a brittle, practiced smile and remained silent, letting the noise of their speculation wash over me. I wasn't here to beg. I was here to claim. Landon spotted me near the dais. He detached himself from a group of powerful investors and moved towards me, his smile wide and practiced, the same confident smile he'd worn the night he walked out. "Well, look who made it," he chuckled, a forced casualness in his voice. He leaned in, his tone dropping to a condescending murmur. "You showed up just in time to watch me get recognized. You'll see how silly you were to get so worked up the other night." He still believed he was in control. He still believed I was the hysterical girlfriend he had discarded, now back to witness his ascension. His smugness was the last piece of fuel my resolve needed. "I wouldn't miss this for the world, Landon," I replied calmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline rush. Richard stepped onto the circular dais, tapping the microphone. The room hushed instantly. His opening remarks were a masterful journey through 4 decades of growth, touching on innovation, vision, and the way technology has transformed how we invest. He spoke specifically of the brilliant minds behind our new momentum, but deliberately avoided naming anyone. Landon, standing prominently in the front row, preened subtly, his hand resting on the podium, ready to accept the baton. He thought he was minutes away from being announced as the technology division's leader. Then, Richard pivoted. "But a legacy of 40 years is built on the willingness to adapt, to be honest, and to recognize true talent. Tonight, we celebrate the true engine of our future." Richard gestured toward Landon. "Landon, I'd like you to join me now to share the breakthrough engine you recently introduced into our trial funds. The success has been undeniable." Landon bounded up the steps, radiating energy. He took the mic, clicked the remote, and the massive, 10-foot screens behind him lit up with the familiar aesthetic of my proprietary algorithm, sleek charts demonstrating superior risk-adjusted returns and unprecedented profit margins. He launched into his presentation, smooth and articulate, reciting facts and figures he'd memorized from my own work. "When I designed this predictive engine," he announced, puffing his chest slightly, owning the credit with a brazen lack of shame. The moment the word I left his mouth, the screens behind him abruptly changed. The complex, colorful charts vanished. They were replaced by a clean, striking slide. Dominating the center was a stylized logo, Citrine Ridge Analytics. Below it, in bold, unmistakable letters, was my name, Chelsea Ball. And beneath that, the legal entity Richard had secretly established, Ball Insight Holdings. A wave of confused, shocked murmurs swept through the ballroom. Landon froze, his smile dissolving instantly. His face, seconds ago glowing with self-satisfaction, went pale. Richard took the mic back, his voice cutting through the noise with authority. With all due respect, Landon, we must be precise about the origins of success. He turned, gesturing to the screen and then directly to me. This is the person who created the intellectual property that has driven our success over the last 2 years, the true technological architect. Richard's voice was calm, but the statement was an execution. It didn't just strip Landon of his credit, it shattered the fragile foundation of his perfect world in front of the 300 most influential people in his life. Landon stammered, recovering just enough to try to salvage the narrative. This is a misunderstanding. She offered technical support. She was a valuable advisor. I led the integration, but the slides kept moving, managed remotely by Eleanor Vance. The next image wasn't a complex chart. It was a simple, damning comparison. Side-by-side code logs showing the development history. One side was the 3-year history of my commits to Citrine Ridge. The other was the cloned, compressed code used in Project Sentinel, clearly showing a massive, unauthorized transfer 2 years ago. Then came the series of emails he had sent, the ones referring to me as his girlfriend, who put the technology under my control. The evidence was methodical, relentless, and publicly humiliating. I knew this was my cue. I walked up the 3 steps to the dais. Landon tried to block me, a wild, desperate look in his eyes, but Richard gave him a single, hard stare that pinned him in place. I reached the mic. My hands were clammy, and my voice wavered slightly on the first word, but I pushed through. I spoke not with anger, but with painful clarity. The algorithm began 5 years ago, as a student project. It was a beautiful, intellectual creation. Landon approached me, claiming he wanted to be my partner, personally, professionally. I paused, letting the silence hang. He did represent the technology to his firm, but he did so by gradually erasing my name from the ownership papers, one signature block at a time, until the day he broke up with me to complete the legal theft. The room was absolutely silent now. My calm delivery, rooted in deep, quiet heartbreak, was far more damning than any shouting match. I told the story not of revenge, but of calculated betrayal, delivered through the lens of my professional identity being stolen by the man who had promised to share his life with me. Landon stood frozen, flanked by screens that advertised his fraud. The opulent ballroom, his stage, had become his trap. For the first time, his mask of the perfect heir was ripped away before his peers, his family, and his father. He was just a thief. Caught red-handed, the ballroom drama was over. But the actual reckoning was just beginning. Richard, with a gesture of cold efficiency, ushered a small, stunned group into a private conference room adjacent to the ballroom. This was the trial. The Hayes Meridian board members, 4 stone-faced veterans, plus Eleanor Vance, Landon, and me. The 40th anniversary celebration had officially become a closed-door arbitration. Landon immediately reverted to denial, a sputtering mix of rage and entitlement. "This is insane, Father, a personal vendetta. Chelsea is clearly distraught over the breakup and is overreacting to a simple credit allocation issue. I was the one representing the team. She's being overly sensitive." He tried to frame the whole thing as a dispute over 1% of the accolades, not 100% of the ownership. I ignored his dramatics, keeping my voice level, focusing only on the data. "Mr. Hayes, members of the board, let's look at the timeline." I presented the sequence meticulously. Initial code commit. 5 years ago. First demo shown to Landon. 4 years and 6 months ago, unauthorized file replication from Citrine Ridge server to an unknown external IP address. 3 years ago, 2 days after Landon received the full source code. Every milestone was backed by a technical log, a timestamp, and a corroborating internal email. I laid out the digital evidence that confirmed my authorship and his subsequent piracy. The data didn't lie. It was the story of theft told in binary. Eleanor Vance then stepped in, her legal precision cutting through Landon's bluster. She addressed the board directly. Mr. Hayes claimed ownership based on this confidentiality agreement signed by Ms. Ball just 1 week ago. However, this document fails the basic tests of IP assignment. It lacks adequate consideration, meaning Ms. Ball received no fair compensation for the transfer. Crucially, it also lacks the signature of Ms. Maya Kaur, the co-founder of Citrine Ridge, rendering any claim that Landon Hayes represented the entire entity fundamentally invalid. Landon had been so focused on neutralizing me that he had failed to consider the second co-founder, Maya, whose signature was equally necessary for a valid IP transfer. He had overlooked the simplest part of corporate law. A seasoned board member, a woman named Ms. Davies, leaned forward, her expression one of utter disdain for Landon. "We asked you repeatedly over the past 18 months, Landon, who the data scientist behind this engine was. You always vaguely implied it was an internal team and deflected on the name. Why?" Landon mumbled something about proprietary information and competitive advantage. Ms. Davies cut him off. "No, you hid her name because the moment you acknowledged Chelsea Ball as the true author, you would have been forced to share decision-making authority and equity. You were protecting your own image, not the company's IP." The room was silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Richard, sitting at the head of the table, hadn't spoken since Eleanor finished her analysis. He looked at his son, not with anger, but with profound disappointment. "Landon," Richard finally said, his voice barely a murmur, yet it filled the room. "Look at her, truly look at her, not at the charts. When you looked at Chelsea, what did you see? A woman you loved and respected, or simply a money printer for your own fragile ego?" It was a question with no palatable answer. Landon had run out of lies, out of legal jargon, and out of family protection. Under the unbearable pressure, Landon finally cracked, his composure shattering. His voice was laced with bitter insecurity. "I was always going to be the rich kid who lucked out. She's brilliant, Father. If I admitted her talent, I would forever just be the boyfriend of the genius. I needed to be seen as the one who built it, the worthy successor. You never gave me a choice." He didn't regret the theft. He regretted the exposure. And he resented the fact that my talent had forced him into a position where he felt he had to steal to feel equal. His ambition was entirely rooted in his fear of being perceived as inadequate. The board members, clearly eager to contain the disaster and capitalize on the successful algorithm, moved swiftly. Ms. Davies proposed a motion: immediately suspend Landon Hayes from all executive roles related to technology, strip him of all signing authority, and initiate a full review of every project he had supposedly led over the last 3 years. The vote was unanimous, 4-0. Then came the recognition I had fought for. Not in a courtroom, but in the boardroom. The board proposed an immediate and formal engagement with Chelsea Ball. We proposed that Ms. Ball, through Ball Insight Holdings, be appointed the official chief technology consultant and exclusive licensor of the engine, granting her veto power over all uses of the algorithm within Hayes Meridian Group. The title I had been systematically denied for 5 years was now legally enshrined. My position, previously based on love and trust, was now secured by an ironclad contract and the full force of Richard Hayes's legal team. Landon, his perfect life collapsed around him, slumped in his chair, no longer the handsome heir, but a figure of complete defeat. He had lost his career path, his credibility, and the valuable relationship he had so ruthlessly exploited. He had planned to take everything from me, and in the end, His attempt to steal my success had only resulted in my rise and his profound public and professional downfall. The whispers started almost immediately. The fallout from the gala night, the reveal on the riser, ricocheted through the financial sector and the Hayes family network. I was a polarizing figure. To some, the disruptor who had publicly humiliated the heir apparent. To others, the truth teller who had stood up to corporate entitlement. I tried to focus on the latter, but the former was always louder in the press. Amidst the chaos, a surprising ally emerged. Elizabeth Hayes, Landon's mother, the matriarch of the Hayes dynasty, a woman who had spent decades as the elegant, silent fixture at the family dinner table, requested a private meeting. We met at an unassuming coffee shop, miles away from the gilded confines of Hayes Meridian. She looked tired, her usual flawless composure slightly cracked. "I know what you did, Chelsea," she began, her voice soft but firm, "and you were right to do it." I was stunned. I expected an appeal, a desperate mother begging for mercy for her son. "I watched him, Chelsea, for years," she confessed, her eyes fixed on her coffee cup. "I saw him becoming increasingly entitled, taking shortcuts, inflating his role. I knew, vaguely, that he wasn't the genius he presented himself to be, but I was too much of a coward to confront Richard or Landon." Then she shared her own truth. She revealed she had been a brilliant economics student, top of her class, with dreams of working on Wall Street, but she had made a choice, sacrificing her career to become Mrs. Hayes, a role she felt diminished her over the years. "When Richard brought you home, I saw the path I abandoned. I saw the pure, unbridled talent. And when I learned about his plan, what he wrote about having you under his control, I felt the betrayal all over again, not just for you, but for the woman I used to be." She looked up, her gaze direct. "I won't ask you to forgive Landon. You owe him nothing. You only owe yourself a life where your value is never, ever undermined again." Her validation was profound, a surprising source of strength from within the very family that had attempted to exploit me. The support wasn't just familial. Over the next 2 weeks, my inbox filled with small, powerful messages. Mid-level analysts, junior traders, and even former Citrine Ridge interns sent anonymous emails thanking me. They shared their own stories of having credit stolen, of watching their ideas be co-opted by senior men who had the power to silence them. They saw me as the person who had done what they never could. "You stood up for all of us who were too powerless to speak." One email read, "It was a sobering reminder that my fight was bigger than a stolen algorithm. It was a battle for professional integrity in a deeply entrenched ecosystem." Richard, meticulously orchestrating the transition, hosted a small, formal dinner at his private residence. He insisted on inviting Maya, my co-founder, making it clear she was a legitimate partner in this new arrangement. This time, I didn't sit in the periphery as Landon's companion. I sat across from Richard, positioned as a respected consultant and the principal of Ball Insight Holdings. Landon arrived late, looking worn and defeated, the polish finally stripped away. He tried one last, desperate attempt to reclaim what he had lost. "Chelsea, I've had time to think. I truly regret what I did. It was fear, not malice. I love you. I want to make this right. We can fix this," he pleaded, his voice thick with what sounded like genuine desperation. I held his gaze, no longer seeing the charming boyfriend, only the desperate thief. "You could have fixed this, Landon, any day, over the last 3 years," I countered calmly. "But you didn't. You planned the perfect exit strategy to eliminate me as a liability. If you truly loved me, you would never have written the words, 'under my control,' to describe the thing I created." The words hung between us, a definitive finality. The room was tense, but before Landon could start pleading again, Elizabeth intervened. "Landon, enough," she commanded, her voice the strongest I had ever heard it. She looked at me. "Chelsea, if you need to leave, if you need distance to build your own future, you have every right to take it. Don't stay out of obligation or pity." In that moment, I realized the classic narrative of the woman being pressured to forgive the flawed man was broken. This family, or at least the true moral compasses within it, were actively encouraging me to choose myself. I excused myself from the table and walked out, Maya following close behind. The loss was real. The loss of the life I thought I was building, the trust I had invested, but the relief was immense, a physical lightening of my spirit. I hadn't just ended a relationship, I had redefined my concept of family. It wasn't about blood, it was about who truly stood by your side when the chips were down. Richard, Elizabeth, and Maya were my new anchors. As we reached the car, Maya grinned, pulling out her phone. "Good news. Analyst ball," she said, her eyes sparkling. "Your stunt at the gala worked better than any marketing campaign. A major independent venture fund just contacted us. They said your story proves that you are the true technology source, not the Hayes name. They want to talk about a massive investment round for Citrine Ridge. They want to partner with the woman who just took down the heir apparent." The future, which had looked terrifyingly empty 2 days ago, was suddenly vast and full of opportunity. I was no longer fighting for my past. I was finally building my own empire, entirely on my own terms. The week following the confrontation was dedicated to cold, strategic negotiation, not emotional recovery. I sat across the table from Eleanor Vance, my lawyer, and the Hayes Meridian legal team, discussing not my heartbreak, but my valuation. The final, crucial phase of the legal strategy was choosing the terms of surrender. Eleanor laid out the 3 primary paths forward, each one a different degree of corporate destruction. Option 1, she stated, clicking a pen, is a full-scale lawsuit against Landon and Hayes Meridian for fraud, IP theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. We would demand maximum punitive damages and likely get them. It would financially devastate Landon and severely tarnish the Hayes brand for years. Option 2 is negotiating a massive equity stake. We demand a significant percentage of the current and future profits, say 15%, in the funds that have illegally utilized your algorithm. This would make me immensely wealthy and a permanent, high-power presence within the company. And option 3, she concluded, is establishing a new, strict licensing and consulting agreement. This involves no lawsuit, but gives you absolute veto power over your technology's use, while we negotiate a settlement that compensates you and Citrine Ridge handsomely for the 2 years of unauthorized use. Richard Hayes, who was also present, spoke with unexpected humility. "Chelsea, you are the aggrieved party here. The financial penalty must be severe enough to demonstrate the cost of this lack of integrity, but I am not here to influence your choice. I will sign whatever document you deem appropriate. I will not negotiate with my son's victim." My mind raced. The primal, gut-wrenching anger wanted option 1. Burn it all down. Landon deserved to lose every penny, every title, to have his name dragged through the mud. That was the easy, emotional satisfaction of revenge. But then I thought of the 200 junior analysts in the Project Sentinel Fund, the analysts who had sent me emails of support, whose 40-hour work weeks depended on the solvency and stability of the Hayes ecosystem. If I initiated a full-scale legal war, I risked bringing down the entire structure, punishing the innocent alongside the guilty. "We are not monsters, Chelsea," Maya reminded me during a private break. Her insight was the necessary cold water on my burning rage. "Our core objective is simple. Protect Citrine Ridge, secure your IP rights, and force accountability. We don't want to win this only to become a mirror image of the ruthlessness that hurt us." I realized my power wasn't in destruction, but in reformation. I chose option 3, but with a radical amendment that transformed the definition of settlement. I pushed a handwritten term sheet across the table. It was a strategy for institutional revenge, not personal ruin. Hayes Meridian will not only compensate me, but you will create and fully fund a new entity, the Ball Hayes Fund for Women in Data. I dictated, my voice gaining strength. "This fund must be co-managed by me. dedicated exclusively to providing seed capital and mentorship to female founders in the data and financial technology sectors. I laid out the financial conditions, severe and non-negotiable. The profits generated by the 2 subsidiary funds that illegally used my engine over the past 2 years will be split. 50% goes to Ball Insight Holdings as back pay and intellectual property royalties. The other 50% is permanently channeled into the Ball Hayes Fund to support other women. This money cannot be used for any other corporate purpose. This stipulation turned my compensation into a mechanism for systemic change. Landon's theft would become the required funding source for future female success. Finally, the terms for Landon himself. Landon Hayes will be stripped of all operational and executive titles for a minimum of 7 years. His role, if the board insists on keeping him employed, will be purely symbolic. Furthermore, he will be mandated to participate in a year-long intensive ethical mentorship program focused on acknowledging intellectual property and power dynamics in the workplace, specifically for men in finance. The legal team shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't a standard settlement. It was a mandate for cultural overhaul, paid for with the very profits of his crime. Richard, reading the terms, looked up at me, a flicker of something close to admiration in his eyes. "You are not just asking for compensation, Chelsea. You are utilizing your injury to create structural fairness where none existed. You're turning his crime into a pillar of change for this industry." When the final document was drafted, Landon was summoned to review it. He was pale and gaunt, barely recognizable as the arrogant man from the gala. He read the terms, his hand trembling. 7 years? A mandatory ethics class? This isn't a settlement. This is a life sentence. Eleanor, my counsel, delivered the final, cold warning. "Mr. Hayes, the only alternative is a public fraud trial. The court will see the evidence of your premeditated theft. A trial will not only result in financial ruin, but will permanently blacklist your name. Sign this agreement, and you keep a vestige of your family name, while your penalty funds the future." He signed. He didn't look at me, but his defeated scrawl on the page was the final admission of guilt. I picked up the pen to sign the finalized agreement, the document that gave me power, wealth, and the ability to dictate the course of a major financial institution. There was no exhilaration, no triumphant smile, just a quiet, determined calm. I chose the revenge that didn't seek blood, but forced the entire system, starting with the man who betrayed me, to evolve. My signature wasn't an act of hatred. It was an act of creation. It was exactly 1 year later. The venue, ironically, was the same. The grand ballroom of the Peninsula Hotel, overlooking the sparkling geometry of the Chicago riverfront. But the purpose of the gathering, and my role in it, had been completely rewritten. Tonight was the official launch of the Ball Hayes Fund for Women in Data. I walked onto the platform, not as Landon's distraught, discarded fiancé, but as the fund's co-managing director. The air was not thick with nervous whispers and judgment, but with the warm hum of anticipation and genuine respect. The financial press, once focused on my disastrous engagement, now called me the ethical architect and the intellectual brain behind a billionaire's pivot. I was no longer defined by a relationship. I was defined by my creation and my convictions. The room was filled with young, brilliant female founders and analysts, women who saw me not as a warning, but as a blueprint. They were the reason I had fought so hard, the promise of a better, fairer industry. I spotted Landon immediately. He sat alone in the 4th row, a solitary figure in a dark suit. There was no microphone for him, no stage, no spotlight. He looked smaller, his posture marked by the weight of consequence. He watched me ascend the steps that he had once owned, his eyes holding a complex mix of regret, helplessness, and an undeniable acknowledgement of the power I now wielded in the very space he had coveted. Just before the master of ceremonies introduced me, Richard Hayes, seated in the front row, leaned over. He didn't speak of the past scandal or the complexity of the legal fight. He offered a final, quiet truth. "You didn't just protect what you created, "Chelsea," he whispered, his aged voice carrying a profound sincerity, "you forced this family, and this entire corporation, to look at itself. You've changed the narrative from greed to responsibility. I owe you far more than you realize." I took the microphone. My hands were steady. I looked out at the audience, particularly at the young women in the front row, their faces alight with hope. I chose to tell my story not as a victim's tale, but as a parable of ownership. "I want to tell you all a story tonight," I began, my voice clear and resonant. "It's about a young woman who was so focused on building something beautiful, an algorithm, a predictive structure, that she allowed the person she loved to be the gatekeeper of her value." I spoke in metaphors, using terms like the architect and the steward instead of our names. I recounted the journey of the intellectual property, from being cloaked in romance to being legally stolen by a fraudulent contract. I described the moment I realized my true purpose wasn't to be a successful founder, but to be an ethical disruptor. "I had a choice," I said, my gaze sweeping over the audience. "I could have chosen to pull the entire structure down in an act of understandable rage. I could have made him, and everyone around him, pay the maximum price. But that choice would have meant destroying the jobs of hundreds of innocent people and proving only one point: that destruction is easier than creation. Instead, I chose to use the very profits of that injustice to build this foundation. I chose to turn a personal wound into institutional armor for every woman who comes after me. I chose to redirect stolen capital into legitimate, ethical opportunity. I chose not to burn the village, but to build a new, stronger wall around it." A few young founders in the audience wiped away tears. They understood that the betrayal was not just about a few $1,000,000. It was about the insidious, systemic way women's contributions are erased in the name of male ambition. My speech resonated because it was the story they feared, and now, it was the story of how that fear was vanquished. After the ceremony, as the room emptied, Landon approached me. He didn't try to touch me, didn't try to lie, and didn't mention the settlement. His face was etched with a quiet, deep remorse that felt genuine, though it was now too late to matter. "You know," he said, his voice flat, "I realize now that I systematically removed myself from the best story I could have ever told, the story of us building this together." His words were a confession of his own profound failure. He had traded a legacy of co-creation for the fleeting vanity of sole ownership. I gave him a short, final reply, one that closed the chapter permanently. "The best story you can tell about yourself, Landon, shouldn't be about who you controlled or what you took. It should be about who you learned to respect and value. If you truly understand that now, then this loss, as terrible as it is, will finally mean something." I walked away from him, leaving him standing alone in the echoes of the applause meant for me. That evening, Richard invited Maya and me back to his penthouse for a quiet dinner. It wasn't the anniversary of our broken engagement. It was a celebration of my professional birth. We toasted not to wealth, but to integrity, to Ball Insight Holdings, and to the future of Citrine Ridge. Later, I stepped out onto the wide balcony, looking down at the shimmering grid of Chicago lights. I recalled the cold, crushing feeling of being abandoned in the dining room the year before. The panic that had seized me as I held Richard's envelope. Now that fear was utterly gone. The man who had walked out on me was irrelevant. I had an empire to manage, a foundation to grow, and a co-founder who celebrated my brilliance. I was no longer questioning the motives of a man. I whispered to the night air. The final, strongest sentence of the entire journey. It wasn't a question, but a profound affirmation of self-worth. I will never again hide from the world what I am truly capable of doing. Thank you so much for listening to the conclusion of Chelsea's story. I'd love to hear your thoughts on her final choice. Was she too merciful, or did she achieve the perfect revenge? Let me know where you're listening from in the comments so we can share our thoughts. Please remember to like this video. Subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories for more real-life tales of justice, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more listeners.